everybody. Welcome to Holy Foley. This is Dr. Vanessa Thiemoman, and today's guest is Julie Rose Bauer. We call her Julie Rose, and she is a sound artist and scholar, and she works with Foley and ASMR, which is really unusual, and I'm excited because this is a whole new area. I'm going to let her elaborate on this, but the way I became familiar with Julie Rose was I did an interview with her a few years ago when I was at Ball State University. And it's part of an article in the latest publication of The Soundtrack, which is an academic film sound journal. Her work is really unusual and fascinating, and I'm really glad that she's with us today. It's just a pleasure to speak with you, Julie Rose. We'll start out with you explaining about ASMR for anyone who may not be familiar with it. I, as I had told you before, was very familiar with it because I like to use it when I have trouble falling asleep. And I told you that my favorite person to listen to is the French Whisperer, although I also listen to different sounds. So let's start with talking a little bit about ASMR and then your interest in Foley and the connections with it. I will tell you, I looked at your website. It is, I will tell everyone, we're going to post the connection to her website. Her reel is fascinating, and connections to seeing how sounds and Foley connect to ASMR. It's elegant, it's artistic, it's beautiful. I highly recommend becoming familiar with it. So why don't you start telling us about it and how you got interested in it?
Certainly. First, I want to thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on Holy Foley with you, Vanessa. I was delighted to speak with you about Foley and ASMR, and I was so happy to hear that ASMR is something that you already get. It's
Mhm.
something that you're already using. It's something which appeals to your sensorium as a Foley artist. It's something you're already tuned into. This is something I had a hunch you would already have a sense of, but when you actually confirm that and we're like, oh goodness, yes, I use this and I listen to this ASM artist, and these are the times when I use this particular type of sound,
Mhm.
around wellness, around, around sleep, around, your health even. This is a really, really amazing thing. And I was just delighted to discover this is something we could chat about that you already knew. So for people that don't know, ASMR is an online digital subculture, and it stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. So what does that mean? So autonomous, it means that of your own self, and sensory, of the senses, meridian, to do with the two sides of the body meeting and feeling in tune, and response. ASMR is something that you only experience in contact with the world. It's not something which you can do without invocating another. So it's a really, really beautiful experience for those that have it, but not everybody does experience ASMR. So I'll tell you a little bit about the beginnings of ASMR as a culture, because of course it's something in real life. It's not just something that exists online, although it's only emerged in the digital era. So ASMR is something that people tend to get in response to sounds like turning the pages of a book
Mhm.
or whispering. Whispering is a really huge thing in ASMR. Or the sounds of clothing, or anything to do with up close sounds which are in contact, in proximity, and which give you a sense of intimacy.
Yeah.
So people tend to get ASMR in real life at the hairdressers or in libraries, at cash machines. People can get it, this kind of the cash coming towards you just for you. Any moment where you have this kind of feedback and you feel like some kind of connection, some kind of intimacy has taken place. So it's very much to do with not just sounds, but also to do with actions, gestures, objects, and situations. So it got named in 2011. Is that right? 2011, yes, and in a forum online. It was somebody called Jennifer Lucy Allen, who is I think she's like a security, an online an IT security consultant. And there's a whole community of people that started to come together to talk about what is this feeling? People who get ASMR describe it as extremely relaxing, which is where the sleep connection comes in. It's described as pleasurable. So, and also it's like a kind of tingling. It begins in the scalp, I've got how, but it tends to begin in the scalp and it spreads out like down the spine and along the arms and legs, typically. But you can feel ASMR in all kinds of ways. Like I can feel ASMR tingling in my nose. I could feel ASMR. Sometimes it's really, I can feel it in my teeth. I can feel it in the soles of my feet. It's something which it's an increased sensitization. And so the research on this suggests, scientific research has begun, and even though it's only been about a decade, 13 or so years that this has even had a name that has caught on. Scientific research suggests that it involves a lowering of the heart rate, so a relaxation, but also increased skin conductance. So a mild excitement is stimulating, and it creates a sensation of touch. It's as if you've been touched when not, and touch can stimulate ASMR, but ASMR online culture is when a completely remote and distanced thing can make you feel like you've been touched. So that's very powerful. And I believe that that is very, very similar to what Foley has been doing for a very, very long time, which has been baked into our movies and more felt than heard, which is your great phrase, Vanessa, from your wonderful book, Foley Grail. But now with ASMR, Foley's ramping up, I feel, like the aesthetics of this really heightened, intense, close microphoned performance culture online. You might have two microphones like this, and somebody will be rubbing something here, rubbing something there. They'll be hard panned right, they'll be hard panned left. You've got your headphones on. So it's a very the sensory culture aspect of it is at the front. It's not in the service of a drama like Foley. It's not something which has been done intentionally within cinema, but it's been there all along. So now we're at a tipping point where we see ASMR cross-pollinating back into cinema, and you have movies like The Substance, which is a very visible sound aesthetic, and it's a body horror. So enjoying all of those sensations, those kinds of that borderline between something that's delicious and just a bit too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Foley ASMR thing is where I situate my practice. And I kind of use a Foley skill set to create ASMR style work.
I remember when I was talking with you back in the day, um, that I think one of the reasons that I respond so much to it is because I'm a highly sensitive person and I don't really like loud. And so one of the things that I find myself doing just in my normal day is I try to do all of the things that I do in my normal home as softly as possible, even putting down a cup or opening the refrigerator door or walking. Um, I get such pleasure out of the soft, gentle way of doing anything. And one of the ways that
Mm.
I really get connected to something that is similar to what you're describing is when I take a shower, I listen to the way the shower sounds and really get connected to it. I don't just get wet and wash. I feel it on my head and I really listen to the way it sounds. And some of my favorite soundtracks have been enveloping not just the Foley, but the way the sound designer or or the supervising sound editor has chosen to do the soundtrack, has chosen to have it be a caressing soundtrack. And so when the really loud, bombastic approach to sound happens in a film, I'm rather repulsed because I really do prefer the more precise and sensitive way of telling a story with sound and only bringing in a loud percussive sound for the purpose of storytelling. And I remember on your reel, one of them is, I think, a sewing thing that you do. It might have been a embroidery or
Yeah.
something like that. And I remember
Yeah.
talking to Ronnie Brown when she went for my book talking about the Daniel Day-Lewis film about sewing and the when he was the tailoring, and he had gone and been a cobbler for a while. Then he came back and he did this film, and she was talking about doing the Foley for that, and I might have mentioned it to you, but I remember thinking about what that would have sounded like and what it would have felt like. And I really enjoy soft, precise, tactile feelings and sounds. And it's just innate for me. And I really wonder how many Foley artists there are that, and not just female, but male as well, that kind of enjoy that more, um, and it isn't always soft, but it's kind of a precise sensitivity to a sound that does give you a more emotional, visceral feeling that isn't bombastic and isn't assaultive and isn't percussive. On your reel, you flip the pages of a book, and they're not necessarily soft pages because they have very defined sound, but it's really entrancing and it does feel really good. And um, as you know, in PhD work, we come across the word haptic, where we physically
Mm.
experience something from the screen that comes and we physically feel it. And that's another term that doesn't really hit the practitioner in Foley so much, but in film, in sound studies, when we study, we come across that word, that haptic experience of physically experiencing what we're seeing on the screen. All of that comes into play when you're talking about ASMR and Foley. And I'm wondering what you would say about that, because that's something that I noticed once I started studying my PhD work and then again talking with you.
I think that the word that comes to my mind in the way that you're describing your pleasure in sound is it's mindful, right?
Yes.
I can I get this sense of you moving around your space and you know your space. You have this kind of like it is a caressing way, you know, how you turn the tap, how you step into the shower, how the water, you can feel it. I could almost,
Mhm.
hearing you describe it, I could feel like what, like the different sensations of the water. But this, I think, is where the Foley artist imaginary comes in to an incredible skill set, which is this ability to empathically and mindfully engage with someone else's experience in that way. I think this is immensely powerful. And so when you talk about, I think water's a really important ASMR trigger, number one, fluid sounds. But I mean, the sound wave, of course, that is the metaphor that we have overridingly for sound. We
Right.
are immersed in
Right.
it. It is dynamic. It repeats, it's ephemeral, it retreats, it disappears, it's always there and it's everywhere, right? So water and sound is very something I'm actually researching right now. I'm writing about the sound of waves, but I'm
So
thinking
not
through this
sound waves, but
metaphor.
water waves.
Well, it's the metaphor, and
Yeah.
there's a whole plank of thinking in feminism around water, thinking specifically about what it means to, in a concrete sense,
Hmm.
to be in a world where we rely so heavily on water. And water and sound have a lot of similarities beyond, you know, acoustics and beyond, because sound is just co-indexed with movement, right? Like sound is not unique. Like it's really just a manifestation, a perceived form of movement. So where Foley art, I think, is really incredible is where we kind of can key into the concrete aspect of sound, which is to say, it's a real thing that is happening to us, on us, with us. We are making it happen. And that is what you've been describing as well as you move around your space. Um, and so I think that the concrete sound practice that is Foley and the fact that it's a noise practice as well, like it's non-speech, non-music on the whole, although there are times when we go into those things, of course, but on the whole, it's object oriented, it's with the world, it's we're making sounds on our own bodies, we're making sounds with the things which are around us in our spaces. And I think that the pleasure of it is because we can all that familiarity,
Hmm.
like that all that native speaker knowledge of our things goes into that sound. And that is intensely nurturing, it's intensely empowering, it's intensely pleasurable to be in the presence of someone else's deep confidence in their surroundings. So I think that that's something that Foley artists bring to their work, and I think it's something that ASM artists are putting under the microscope, actually, because you're not just saying, oh, you can make sounds and they feel good. You're saying, but what does it feel like in this moment
Mhm.
to have this sensation unfolding on, in, around me? Like it's a connection with the world, is what's going on. And so this is a very, I think it's a very beautiful practice. It's a very poetic practice. And I think artistically, it's extremely fertile as a theme of practice. And that's why I do it, because I love it.
Yeah. It's interesting when you come from the industrial part of it. um, the focus is always on the process and getting it done and getting to the next reel and getting to the next scene and trying to find something that works. And I wonder, now I've always been very mindful. That's just my nature to be very focused on my full experience while I'm doing it. And I don't think that's the normal process for most people who are in the industry trying to get something done. They're focused on the result. And I think a discussion like this would be very good for any practitioners or people interested in the practice of it to really think about, because whenever you're doing your work, I mean, it is an art, and it's not just trying to get a result so that you can get something done for the film and move on. There's uh, I know that I have intense pleasure, especially walking characters, because starting out as a dancer, the choreography of feeling what the character is and trying to get into that whole sense of who that person is and what that feels like and having it in my body has a very pleasurable sense for me. And when I'm working with a prop, I'm not just trying to think about what it sounds like. I'm trying to get some sense of pleasure out of it. And it is my nature to always try to find the sense of play in something when I'm doing it. That's just my nature. I'm I'm kind of, it's really funny. I'm kind of a very serious thinker, but a very playful person. And anyone
Right.
who spends time with me for very long will, I think, be amused by how silly and ridiculously playful I am about absolutely everything I do, while being seriously philosophical about absolutely everything I do. And it's kind of an odd combination. And I could go into a long discourse that would bore absolutely everybody on earth about how I know how this came about and who my parents were and how I grew up and the way my mind works. But it is kind of an odd juxtaposition of the way I operate in the world. And so when I think about that, I wonder, I think back about all the people I worked with starting in Hollywood and then a bit in the Bay Area and teaching, and the people I've talked to, and then people I've talked to in New York and around the world. And I wonder how many of them really take the time to allow themselves, because we're not supposed to be taking our time, the moment of that pleasure. And that would be an interesting discussion, because you can do it quickly. You can allow yourself to be in that moment quickly, but I'm not sure that's ever been something we've been told we can do. Um, and
You
it's
can do it
fine.
quickly, but can you do it stressed? You
Yeah,
can do it quickly, but can you do it stressed? And it strikes me that you can't do Foley well if you're stressed, because you have to have, like you've described, that moment of crossing over into somebody else's body.
I agree.
You have to have this moment where you have a transcendent experience,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
And Foley artists aren't in it for plain job satisfaction. Like there's something else that goes on with the Foley artist, which I
yeah.
think is deeply sensory, but also to do with some kind of escape from the body, or yeah, some kind of shared identity which kind of comes into being in the moment of Foley practice.
The
Um,
practice
it
of
would be interesting to, I think,
in the practice of doing it for a movie where someone's paying you and they're putting pressure on you or they have expectations, everybody has a different reason and approach to how they're doing it. And I wouldn't presume to know what's in their head or how they, I only know what I would observe. But I do know for me, I always try to balance absolutely everything I do with a sense of play and mindfulness and art and enjoyment. And that, as I say, is just my nature. When I find myself getting tense, I know that I will either remove myself from the situation or try to rethink how to approach it. But you are opening up a very different kind of discussion about what this is. And it takes somebody, this is where I like to bridge the gap between practice, theory, art, scholarship, or put all of these bridges together. Because when you are doing it for the purpose of exploring it rather than the purpose of trying to make a living, there is a different discussion and a different way of experiencing it. And I really like to put those two things together. One of the ways that you can put it together is when I get called upon by somebody who wants to do this for theater, or they, and they want me to play or they want me to experiment. Like I've done a lot of different radio show things. Like when I was in Muncie at Ball State, we did Christmas radio shows and I got to just completely play and I was totally trusted. And it was they have a fantastic theater department there, and the directors are really great, and they have a great music department, and they have state-of-the-art facilities, and it was just massively fun with wonderful people, and it was a very different experience. And then there are the pressures of the industry in Hollywood, and some people who really do take it in stride, and other people who are very concerned about what people think, and then other people whose egos get in the way, and then other people who have a lot of anxiety, and there are a lot of different things going on. But you are opening up a discussion that I think everyone should visit, which is how can I carve out that mindfulness and that awareness of what this is, what that pleasure is for me while I'm doing this, in addition to getting the result that I need to get or going where I need to go with this or finishing what I need to finish, because every it's my philosophy that every experience we have should incorporate all of that. Um,
And there is this argument that if we can't have fun in the theater, where can we have fun, right? I think that
but
we live in such deeply competitive times, and with the pleasure, the sheer pleasure of practice is very radical, actually.
I
And so
know,
this I really believe that a Foley performance that was really, really like felt, that was really enjoyed, that's the better Foley performance. Like a tight little stress, did I get it performance is,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not going to be the one that's gonna serve the work best, right? So it's not just about kind of, obviously production schedules are tight, obviously budgets are getting cut and cut and cut, but there are lots of different types of practicing happening at lots of different places in the ecology, right? People are making movies on iPhones, people are making podcasts and YouTube channels, and
I wonder
there's
who
a
would be
lot
doing
of
that. Huh.
some very original people will be doing
Certainly
that
not
kind
doing
of work.
certainly not doing this to make the big bucks, let me tell you. For me, this is absolutely, just speaking for myself, because I think there are a lot of people that are doing this for the reasons I do it. This is my expansion of my mission to archive discussions that I think need to be out there about the discussions that need to be that were part of my writing that are now oral, and oral, so that people can always have this to go back to and then have it in them. Because otherwise, when will it be documented? When will it be discussed? When will people know that these ideas are out there? This is important stuff, and you're talking about it right now. There's the pressure of getting this done right, getting all of that stuff, but it's also the pleasure of experiencing somebody's ideas, and then you're going, wow, uh, this is a different way of looking at something, and this is very enjoyable, and there's a lot that goes into the preparation, but it's and the editing and the production of it, but it's also, this is for me, the experience of something new, and the in the moment mindful experience of something is for me what life is all about. But I really always think it comes back to that. And you said it, mindfulness and being aware, which is what ASMR can always bring us back to, because it concerns us with sounds that are not deflecting us or distracting us, but actually getting us in touch with ourselves, which I
into
think
the
is
moment. And it's there are philosophers have long been concerned with getting back to things as they are, right? Husserl and so on. And I think that this is a really, really important concern. Like, we aren't just projecting somewhere very, very distant, somewhere very an imagined future, an imagined past, somebody, the person we want to be, but actually being the person, the person that we are in the life that we're in. Like,
right.
what would it mean to appreciate that? So it's of course we all have to earn a living. Like, life is real, right? And there are stresses and there are overheads and there are all those types of things. But
As a matter
it's
of fact, I have a bank robbery that I have to do shortly after this. So yeah,
well, that if it funds the podcast, Vanessa, then I'm all here for it. But I think that the things that you've been saying about um excessive amounts of like, very, very noisy, bombastic soundtracks where you feel like you're under attack.
hmm
They that's a there's something violent going on within that, and
hmm
there's a place for it. But then there's also a place for something very sparse, a place for something that's very but we don't need necessarily to have audio visual we don't even need screen cultures for it, is the nuts thing. So like, I think Foley artists, I mean, it's not the best paid profession in the world, but the people that do it are immensely motivated to remain within those roles, right?
I agree.
So I think that we need to be really, really, whenever people talk about money, I get suspicious because I'm always like, it's never really about the money, is it? It's always, it's people, if you're making enough to live, then you don't need, that's not necessarily a concern that you need to kind of like be justifying things as always the reason. So yeah, the type of job satisfaction that you get being a maker, as you are, as I
Yeah.
am,
Yeah.
and the job satisfaction that you get by doing one thing really, really well. Like, on this one, I'm just doing the Foley, right? There are different ways of accessing it, but I really, really think that this particular practice is having a huge moment and is growing in its
Yes.
scope,
Yes.
and in people understanding sound practice is an incredibly powerful practice, which you can have a career in many different ways, and where you and did you notice? Have you seen this movie, The Substance?
I have not.
Okay, so it's just come out. It's called The Substance. It's directed by someone called Coralie Fargiat, and she's a director. It's got Demi Moore and it's got Margaret Qualley. It's got all these like big stars in it. But this is the really exciting bit. The Foley is exquisite.
So
The sound on this film is incredible. And the Foley artist gets main billing. Not the little small print down the end, but like the last big name is Gregory Vincent, and he's the Foley artist.
that's
So
wonderful.
it's but like the visibility of the sound as an aesthetic choice within the movie, it's so clearly inflected by ASMR. It's so clearly inflected by historic horror soundtracks, which have been brought more towards this very femme online pleasure kind of way of doing things, which we experience with ASMR. And I think it's a really magnificent example of the
Definitely.
state of play.
I'll definitely see it.
And you must.
I will.
It's
How did
it's
you?
like it's a very, very over the top film, but I really enjoyed it.
I will definitely see it. I would like to know how you got started um, being interested in screen culture, sound, all of this, um, because I don't even know how that began for you.
Sure. So
Oh, and
I'm
by the way,
somebody
I think
who
everybody
has
can probably tell that you're, across the pond over in England. But I think if they can't figure that one out, because I didn't mention it at the beginning, but yes, she's over in England.
So yeah, I'm in London. It's the evening here in London. It's like about 9 p.m. at night. Yeah, it's about 20 to 9 at night. And Vanessa's, you're about lunchtime where you are now?
We are, yes.
You are at lunchtime. So yes, I was brought up here in England, and I'm from the Midlands, which is famous for heavy metal music. And it's I was always brought up with music, and I always played in bands growing up, so I always had this kind of contact with sonic hardwares, with making, like, it was a very big time in indie music, and
And
at
what did you
times
play?
people
Did you
you were,
play guitar or what did you play?
I played the bass guitar, I sang, but we just kind of, we were very eclectic in our we were doing musique concrète, we were recording things, and we were, it was our way of hanging out with one another. So this was always a pleasure. I was in various bands, I went to university, and then I went into theatre. So theatre was really the space where I developed a movement practice. As a younger person, I did dancing growing up as well. So I did a lot of improvisation, a lot of movement, a lot of devising. I wanted to make theatre, not just, be an actor. I wanted to actually be more of a performance maker. That was what I was interested in doing. And so I did that for a few years. I trained at the Jacques Lecoq School in Paris, which is like a
Uh,
movement specialism place. And when I moved to London after that, I really went into site-specific, immersive, expanded cinema. And there was a huge movement of these companies making shows where the audience were participants in this entire experience, and there was everybody dressed for the part, and it was a really exciting time to be, a really fun, really vibey time to be um making theatre in London. And I did devise work and various acting jobs and bits like this. But then I had a career break, and I had a kid, and I was like, if I'm going to come back, if I'm going to carry on being in the creative arts, which is a very challenging space to make ends meet within, I've got to make it count. And at that point, I decided to decisively go from being a movement oriented artist to being a sound artist. I was like, right, so I got my loop station, I got my microphones, I got my props and my objects, and I made a Foley show. And I was like just so fascinated by this idea that there was this gap between the way that the sound got made, the origin of the sound, and where it ended up in the fiction, this illusion that you created. I was really, really fascinated by this moment, the way that you could do something with a very, very humble object and then send it somewhere that would, could be very, very distant in space and time, and have a very different identity. So I made that show, and my child was about, 2 years old at this point, and I toured it a bit and stuff. And it was really interesting because the student audiences really got this work. And one of them wrote a review of it, which said, this is an ASMR-like experience. It's like mesmerizing, it's kind of oddly involving, kind of relaxing but strange. And I was like, yes, it is like that. So ASMR was just starting to come out. This was around 2017, 2018 that I was doing this. And I was like, I wonder if I could take this skill set that I've just kind of um acquired, been practicing within. I wonder if I could then turn that into making ASMR, like intentionally making ASMR work. And so I did. I re-soundtracked some videos. I've got one. I did one of someone washing their hair on the International Space Station. So because it's a very strange kind of a video, but just by NASA, and I re-soundtracked it as ASMR, and it worked. It worked right away, and I knew because the person in the studio next door to me, I'm an artist, I have a studio, I went to ask them to be quiet because something, and they said to me, "Oh my goodness, who is that woman? Who is that woman whispering in the next room? Oh my gosh, is this ASMR? I get that. It's really bad. I try not to listen to it. Oh my god." And they were like, had this really guilty response, and I was like, "Oh, it's working. Interesting." Because whispers aren't really my thing, to be honest. But yeah, it was apparent that this was something which I kind of had a sense for. I liked it, and it was something which I wanted to explore further. And I was already doing my PhD at this point, practice-based PhD. I'd already like decided to get onto that path of things to try and create a more like a strand of practice in academia, which I'm still doing. Um, and yeah, then suddenly framing this as practice, this practice-based research, I started getting invited to do things like, and so I've done a lot of things at museums, like the ASMR at the Museum series, which is effectively a site-specific quasi-documentary series where we do very close-mic'd videos of experts at museums behind the scenes doing what they do. So things like sewing and textile conservation, things like turning the pages of books. That book turning video is like parchment, and it sounds like thunder when it's up close. Because
Beautiful.
animal skin.
Mm-hmm.
So it was starting to think about the materiality of sound and thinking about sound as a way of accessing the privilege of museum experts who get to touch the museum objects. So I was thinking about sound erupting touch, I was thinking about access, I was thinking about privilege, and I was thinking about how this strange subculture could intersect with like more mainstream spaces, because the people who worked at the museum got this kind of sense that like they felt these kind of delicious, tingly, relaxing moments of euphoria as they went about their work. And people that work in museums also are not brilliantly paid necessarily, but they love working where they work. And it's because of exactly this kind of thing where they, on a sensory level, they love the hush, they love all the packaging, all the care, all the nurture, and the mission of the museum, which is ultimately about conserving history. So this proved to be a really, really good fit for that, and it kind of sat with my site-specific practice. It wasn't a Foley piece because I didn't add any sound. It was just forensic sound, like pulling out in the post-production toolkit everything that was already there and getting as close as we could. And so then I did the interactive gallery for Weird Sensation Feels Good, The World of ASMR, which is this really beautiful show which ArcDes, the Swedish Design Museum, and London's Design Museum did. And I was the commissioned artist for that because I've got a slightly more eclectic background. I'm from the theatre world,
Right.
and I've done, quite big scale multimedia installations before. You get invited when you're sitting at an interesting intersection between things, you start to get nice invitations like that. So it's been, yeah, I guess I went around the houses I've done all kinds of things, but I've had a very nice few years of practice exploring ASMR, but very much starting from a place of appreciating Foley and thinking with Foley, practicing
Mm-hmm.
that style of, because for me it's a style of sound. That's the style of sound that I'd like to design with. So Foley's just one way of making that kind of sound. There are other ways of doing it too, and it's related to musique concrète, and it's related to all those processes that you were talking about in terms of listening to yourself and listening to very subtle sonic events, which might give you very big clues about what's going on in a space. I find all that very fabulous and mysterious and exciting to be around. And yeah, there's a lot more to come as well, I think. So that's kind of my background with it.
Do you interact with anybody else who's doing Foley in any other aspect in England?
Well, yes, and this Foley special issue that I recently contributed to for the soundtrack, there was a seminar which Amelia Talion, the editor, she brought together 8 Foley scholars. There was me, there was Lucy Fife Donaldson, who writes on texture and film, Lisa Coulthard, who's a Canadian scholar, Gabrielle Berry, who's wrote brilliantly about audio description and closed captions
Right.
specifically. No, it wasn't audio, it was closed captions. Damien Pollard, who wrote on animal Foley. Rebecca Glover, who's a Foley artist here and also a fine artist. So she's doing some quite interesting fine art Foley.
I read the entire I bought the entire issue and read every article, and it was just wonder. I have to say, it is so gratifying having been one of the first people to be writing about Foley and struggling to get journals to even care. Because it was 10 years ago, to even get them to care about what it was or how it related. And they would always say, and this is actually humorous because I had been the only one to be, I mean, just a couple of us were writing about, they'd say, well, we need you to have, I'd submit something and they'd say, well, we need you to find sources to that you can refer
There
to.
weren't any.
And I'd say, I'm the it. I mean, Jay Beck wrote a little bit about it at that point, and that was it, right? And he and I were Rick Altman's only two people. And I said, I'm the only one. I've in my bibliography, you will see the only things. And my husband and I at the time, Dave Stone, who had an Oscar for doing the sound effects for Dracula, and we had a newsletter writing about the sound contemporaneously, which is now a book based on movie sound newsletter. And we were writing at the time, which ended up being analog going to digital in Hollywood, and we didn't even know that was going to happen. But we were the only people writing about film sound and having our colleagues in Hollywood and the Bay Area writing about film sound, and a few people in New York. And I said, there aren't any. So they didn't even understand that there wasn't anyone. So now it's just so gratifying that it's being taken seriously and it's being accepted into journals, because 10, 15 years ago, when I was starting my PhD work, it was like, are you kidding me? There isn't anyone. This is kind of new. And the very things that were being rejected are now in books and in chapters and edited editions and in my dissertation, which became a book. And I'm just thinking, when you are too early, they don't even know what to do with you. So thank goodness, I'm thrilled about all of the people who are writing about it, because now there's just all of these wonderful scholars and people interested in writing about it that are doing wonderful explorations. And it's so exciting. And I'm reading what they're doing and I'm thinking, oh, I need to talk to this person. I need to talk to this person. And most of them are in Europe. There are a few people in the
Interesting.
United States, but I have to say that most of the work that's being done is over on your side, over there where you guys are. And I,
Well, you are such a major touchstone. You are the Foley scholar, Vanessa. So, everybody in this issue cited you because your book is the book, right? So you blazed a
uh,
trail, and thank goodness for you, right? Like but I hope you feel vindicated, right? I hope you feel
well,
like
that's not really the
you know,
word. I have to tell you, the word is actually overwhelmed and surprised, because I, I seriously, because the way that book came to be, I was sitting in my living room and I was just talking to my husband and my son, and I said, you know, nobody ever writes about Foley artists. And I think someday I'm going to write a book and I'm going to call it the Foley Grail because I like wordplay. But I want to write about the people who do Foley, because no one's going to know what we do if I don't write about what we do. And it was about, 4 or 5 years later that I started writing about it. And my only goal was to make sure people knew what it was we did. And so the first edition is about what we do. And I knew everyone, so I could just meet them and drive them and go to a studio or meet them somewhere and then just talk about what we do. But then as I started getting my PhD, it's what they do. And then when I started teaching as an endowed chair, it's what what I am teaching. And I started getting access to people all over the world because the book spread like wildfire, which I never expected, or all this humble goal I had was just people should know these people and what we do, because we're all going to die and no one's going to know what we did. They're not going to know what this is. They're not going to know how this
a
started.
lost art.
Nobody had written about Jack Foley. We all thought he was a sound editor until I started researching and talking to his granddaughter and going to the academy and the academy library, and I went, he wasn't a sound editor. He never picked up film. He was, he was an assistant director and a director, and he drew cartoons and he directed some plays. And I worked in secret for the War Department during World War I to protect the water supply in Bishop. I mean, it was stuff that was not at all. And I went, whoa. He actually had more in common with my grandfather, who was at RKO, and had worked also during the silent film era. So you never know what's going to happen. You never know. So yeah,
Blessings be on the polymath. Blessings be on the polymaths,
right,
Vanessa.
right. I
But
know.
but the way that you've described it, it's actually very similar to the way that ASMR happened. The first ASMR video was a woman who was working as a dispensing optician. She had nothing to do with film. She wasn't a performance artist. She wasn't anything to do with these things. And she was watching the reality TV show Big Brother,
Uh-huh.
which was this schlocky show where they had very like they put people together in a space and there was a diary room and they would talk to the camera like this to confide their secrets and their frustrations about their housemates. They would whisper because the partitions were so thin that they didn't want the housemates to hear what they were saying. And so they put this extra content as a video diary online very early, like in 2009. Like there wasn't a lot of content like that. So, but she and the other people went to this video content as in unintentional ASMR. And she went, hmm, I really like whispers.
Yeah.
And I bet there are more people out there like me who are interested in pursuing this thing. So the first ASMR video is called Whisper One Hello. It's by Whispering Life ASMR. I'm in touch with her. She's a wonderful
Wow.
person, very generous. And I verified this story with her because it's just so extraordinary. And it reads, the text of this video reads like a manifesto. She's literally saying, it doesn't really matter what I say. Like you could if you could just talk about anything, it's just the whisper. It just sounds nice, really. So it's this whole the medium is the message thing going on. She's very, very, and she's like, is it like a weird fetish or something? So she's also kind of like speaking about the anxieties around like what is this? Nobody really knows what it is. But she's like, and I'm not very good with, microphones and what have you. And she just literally did it in one take, uploaded it with a blank screen. So it's like and then that was it. That was the first whisper video. And so it takes someone sticking their neck out, which is what you
Yeah.
did, and to say, well, actually, I think this is really interesting. This is really important. And if I don't kind of put a flag in the earth at this point, it could dissipate, it could disappear, right?
Yeah. You know, people like that fascinate me. One of the reasons I'm doing this Holy, Whole dash Y Foley, and then the musical is called Holy Holy Foley, the musical that I'm working very hard to someday try to get produced on stage because my first skill has always been singing and songwriting. This was something I fell into. I'm fascinated by people who try things. I'm fascinated by that. I'm very interested in other people and what they do and why. And I just find it fascinating. Um, and so I'm always looking for people who tried something different and wanted to try, who, and my excuse is I get bored with myself. So why do I try something different? Because I bore myself. And I just assume that that must be a motivator for a lot of people. I can't be the only one that gets bored with myself. So I think, well, they're bored with what they're doing and they want to try something else. And so let's find out what that is. And the
I love
people,
that description. I love that.
yeah, it's like I'm bored with
That I
myself.
get bored with myself. It's so
Try something
go on.
else. And it is really fascinating because um, these are the people that try, and there's another quality. They're not afraid to fail. They don't worry about being an idiot and doing it wrong. And that's certainly true with me because I'm an idiot and do it wrong 40, 50 times a day. So I'm not the least bit worried about being an idiot and doing it wrong because it's like, oh, I just did it wrong, so I have to do it again. Because what's the worst that can happen? I'll just have to do it again. So I'm not the least bit
But
worried about failing. Yeah, I'm
what's
not
really
worried.
interesting is that
Yeah.
when the I have a scientist friend, Julia Poerio. She's an emotion scientist. We've written a chapter for Routledge together on it's called Routledge Performance and Science, and we wrote a chapter about ASMR because she researches it as a scientist. I research it as someone in the arts and humanities. We have a shared research base, but we're coming from very different places, and we
Mhm.
get on really well. And she's told me that one of the biggest personality markers for people that identify as responding to ASMR, getting ASMR, is openness to experience. ASMR responders rate very highly on this psychological marker, this personality characteristic, which is openness to experience.
Interesting.
So I think this is very, very interesting. The politics of that are extremely interesting. And this is about sensory politics, actually, because people who are very close to experience tend to have extremely conservative political beliefs.
That doesn't
And they're
surprise
very,
me.
very worried about
I was going to go there
very
with
worried
that.
about borders, very worried about things intruding on their space, very worried about and very anxious on those levels. Whereas people who are more open to experience, more less more into touch, more curious to the world. And obviously, like, if you've had a bad experience, you'll be less likely to be open to experience. But thankfully, you and I have remained open to
Yeah.
experience. And so people experience ASMR for the first time, typically when they're children. In fact, that's an interesting one. Can I ask you, what do you remember your first ASMR experience?
Yeah. Huh. That would be an interesting question. I don't know. I
Yeah.
know that I had I know for me, I had very open-minded, unconventional parents who were not like other people and they weren't rule breakers necessarily. They were really on top of it people, but they didn't really worry about fitting in with other people. And they were very open-minded and led their own lives. And we were free thinkers, I'll tell you that. And so very open to new experiences. I mean, I just grew up that way. So needing to conform or be conventional just isn't something I grew up with. And I also had a gay brother. And I grew up in a very, it was very Christian at the time. I mean, there was a lot of, there was the blacklist and there was a lot, and my parents were atheists and proud of it. And so there was a lot in my family where it was like not important to conform to what other people expect. And lots of laughing and humor in a very intellectual household. So being open to hearing a new idea has just been embraced in my life and in my family forever. I can't even imagine not being open to a new idea. It just doesn't even cross my mind. Doesn't even cross my mind. Why wouldn't I be? What's the harm?
Well, well, this is but not everyone feels that way, right? Not everyone feels that way. So, like, my first experience, conscious experience of ASMR was actually watching a movie. I was do you know the Japanese director Miyazaki,
Oh, of
who
course.
creates all the Studio Ghibli? Yeah, of course. So I had Laputa Castle in the Sky was a film that I had when I was a kid. And the Foley on those things is just so heightened. It's so beautiful. There,
Yeah.
and things go. It's very the Foley is extremely heightened, and apparently they crank it down in the American soundtracks versions compared to in Japan. But I think that the one that I don't know. Anyway, I was been very primed with these sounds. But then on the end of this film, I had a puppet show which had been taped off the television. It was VHS because I was very tiny, and they used it in a magic show, squirty cream. The screen that goes
Uh-huh.
that one. When that sound came, I was like, I feel funny. And it was a very intense moment of going, what's this? What is this sensation? What is this feeling? Very, it felt, yeah, I liked it, but I felt weird.
I remember, I tell this story frequently. I very much remember my parents took me to the movies with them all the time. They weren't overly protective. They were very always there with me. And we saw a movie, it might have been Robin and the Seven Hoods, or it was I remember, I don't remember exactly, but it was a Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack movie. And they are on the streets and they're walking around and they're getting into a car. And I remember listening to the sounds of their shoes. And their shoes
Mm.
just sounded so beautiful. And it was
Mm,
definitely Foley. I know that now. But I
yeah, of
remember
course.
thinking, why don't my shoes sound that good? I want my shoes to sound that pristine and that pretty because mine don't. And I was very young. I think I was 6 or 7. And
What an unusual ambition for a child.
I remember thinking the next day I was trying to find like brat, like taps, like, little tacks or something to put on my shoes to make them try to sound better. But I thought, how do you make your shoes sound that good? And so I was already tuning into um, specific sounds that were pleasing and artistic sounding. And so I was early on listening to sounds that were more pleasing to me and more precise and more artistic sounding. And so it wouldn't necessarily be ASMR, but it certainly would be an understated, refined, elegant sound, I would say, very young, and saying, why don't my shoes sound that good? And now, of course, I know because it was Foley. And so I always love doing footsteps because I love creating, even if they're in the dirt or in the mud or in the snow or in grass or on rock. It doesn't really matter, but I love creating the sound of, see, I'm really getting into bliss now. The sound of what the shoes and the footsteps and the character are going to sound like. I just love that. And it starts in that very first memory where I could imagine that. And I have to say, I love doing props, but there's nothing in the world more satisfying to me than being able to create what those footsteps are going to sound like and have them be that character. There's something blissful and it just takes me away and it gets into my whole body and and it feels like I'm that person. It's just amazing. It's the most amazing feeling for me. And I walk differently and I place my foot in a different way. And of course, I don't even think I'd had ballet by then. So that was before I'd had any ballet. And I'd already been feeling in my body like this pretend sense. It was just it's really funny. There's so much to think about way past ourselves and the imagination and taking on these sounds and what they can do and what they can feel like. And ASMR is the beginning of this, but there is this whole world of what sound can, where it can take us and what it can make us feel like. But I will never, for the rest of my life, ever forget that moment. You said movie, in that movie with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. I remember seeing them. It might have been, I think it was Robin and the Seven Hoods. I want to say that, but it was something on the street, because that's a gang movie. On the street, getting into a car, and I think it was Chicago. I just see it, and I see them getting into the car, and I hear the shoes, and I think, I want my shoes to sound like that. And I for the rest of my childhood kept thinking, how can I walk to make my shoes sound like, and it might be why I ended up being such a darn good tap dancer. I don't know. Well, this is interesting. At some future date, there's so much more to explore about this because there's more to listen to and talk about. We're just beginning this conversation, and I want to have you back and do part 2 because
Great.
there's
I would be delighted.
there's a lot here. So we need to do part 2, and I don't think we'll wait too long. I think we'll do part 2 about a second aspect of performances you may have done or films you may have done, if that would be okay.
Yeah, I would love it. Absolutely. I'm always happy to talk about practice, and I'm always happy to talk with you. So, let's do it again.
Okay, we'll do it again very soon. I want to thank you. This is
Perfect.
just the beginning of, I think, a topic that's even bigger than I would have thought. So we'll plan part B shortly. I know that you're going away on a trip, so we'll do it when you get back. Would
I
that
would
be
love
okay?
it. Like they thought that Foley was like a ridiculously small niche, but it's not. And they think, and ASMR has also been dismissed as this kind of weird, like small time thing. But actually, I think that what's happening is that like they're bolstering one another and growing as a category. So I think it's really, really, it would be great. It would be
I do
great to carry
too.
on the conversation.
I really want to thank you. This has just been, now as I'm talking, thinking, wow, this is a huge topic. And now we're getting into um, a conversation that I think I want to talk about your very specific works you do and how you do it and some examples. So we'll get more into this. We'll do part B when you get back from your trip.
Fabulous. All right, well, we'll be in touch.
Wonderful.